So it's time for me to call to the stage our next speaker, and I really would like to introduce Craig. Hi, how are you doing?
I'm good, and you?
I'm really fine. Today I will moderate the speech and your Q&A session. It was a pleasure to meet you before, and I really like your topics and what you're doing for the community. So I don't want to take your time because for sure my speech is less useful than yours. So please take stage and I'll come back soon.
All right, thank you. All right, so I'd like to welcome you all here. I know you guys have been watching these all day, so I'll try to keep it a little short and sweet, but hopefully you'll keep your interest. Uh, let's start it. Simplifying complex designs with SwiftUI grids, and we're gonna get into it. So a little bit about me is probably something you guys should know before I get really into this talk. Is I started iOS back in 2010 when the iPad was first announced. I can remember that day. It was probably it was 2010, obviously, but it was in January, and I wasn't expecting iPad announcement. It just kind of was watching it like everyone else, and they uh they dropped the iPad, and I think I was like all giddy and couldn't wait. As soon as that announcement, I literally signed up for the developer account. I had no clue about Objective C, but I did know that I was going to be dropping some money because, yeah, it's Apple and that's what you do. And so I was like, whatever money you need, I'm giving you for the iPad and the developer license. It's on. I knew I was ready, but shortly thereafter, once I started getting into Objective C, I realized um, Objective C is not easy, and especially when you're teaching yourself. And I realized that it was a struggle. But luckily, I was fortunate enough to move to Tampa, and during that time, I ended up getting into a meetup group, and that meetup group ended up helping me a lot because I was able to talk to other devs and interact with them and ask questions when I was stuck. Shortly after that, I ended up, well, I would say shortly, but a few years later, I ended up running the iOS meetup group in Tampa, St. Pete area for about 3 or 4 years, and that led me to writing 3 books, starting back in 2016. So iOS 10, iOS 11, and iOS 12. And after iOS 12 book, I said I'm done. But the book is still going. We are in iOS 15, and iOS 16 book is coming soon. So that's great. I love the fact that Ahmad picked it up and has done it. But I said after that I wasn't going to do any books, and then SwiftUI came out. So then I wrote another book called SwiftUI Projects, and SwiftUI Projects basically got me here. And I was at the Apple event, and I remember saying at an event that I was done writing books until I saw the keynote, and then I was really contemplating writing a book, and I hadn't even talked to Pact yet about it. And they were ready to ask me to write the book, so it was kind of, I guess, it was in my aligned it was in my future to write SwiftUI projects. It took me a little over a year and a half. But my background is from FanReach, which is my very first job. I worked there for about 8 years, and I pretty much did NFL, NBA, and NHL apps for about 8 years or so. And sports is my passion. I absolutely love it, other than iOS. And so this was the perfect job for me because I got to do and work on weekends and get paid to watch sports, and do things that I never thought I would be able to do. After my 8 years, I realized that I needed to move on into something else, and I ended up joining EdFarm, which you can see my team, Daisy, Taylor, Alandis, and Sarah, giving them shout outs. So we work on what's called the Movement app, and the Movement app is basically people of today telling their stories of civil rights and all of that, telling the stories of civil rights and human rights from their voices. And it gives me, I love the fact that we're doing it, and we do it in conjunction with Apple, and they help us with the funding, and it gives me the ability to have the ability to mentor. And this is what's great, is I get to mentor and help. So it's in 2022, Apple and EdFarm partnered up. I got the ability to work with other developers who may not have been had the opportunity to get into iOS. And now I started working with 2 developers, Daisy and Alandis, and then moved on to 4 more. So now I have 6. And again, it's a lot of work, but I enjoy doing it. Finally, I started doing design to SwiftUI, which then turned into design to SwiftUI on YouTube, which turned into, you may be falling asleep at this point because I'm telling you a lot of stuff. So next time I'll keep on the story. But as you can see, I do a lot and I'm involved in a lot. And we're going to get into it now. So what are we going to learn today? We're going to learn 3 basic things today. We're going to look at complex designs in iOS 15. We're going to look at intro to grids in iOS 16, and we're going to then cover complex design simplified in iOS 16. All right. So the first thing that we're going to cover are complex designs in iOS 15. So we're going to look at 3 designs that I basically did in iOS 15 and 16 and compare the 2 to each other. So we're going to start with the very first design, which is, of course, sports related, and it's a standings app for the NFL. And this is an actual app. You go to the Patriots, you see it, and I liked it. I actually did the design and helped out with a lot of the stuff that's in this app. But there are some challenges when you're using SwiftUI in this particular design that you may not think of when you first look at it. So the first challenge is multiple alignments within a grid. So how do I make the wins, losses, and ties make center? And if you look at the design, the person who did this had trouble doing it and the comps and the designs tied wins, losses, and ties should all be centered, and they're not, because it's very difficult to get that to work. And then you add dynamic type to that. So the next thing that's an issue is spacing, and how do you make that work? And then thirdly, flexibility. So let's look at how this looks in SwiftUI. So the first thing we see here is, this is the basic design. I created a header row with a divider. I used a VStack and a for each to create each item. Excuse me. So what did I do after that? So now that I have that, I go into the row header, and I have to create an H stack. In this H stack, we have spacing that's set to 8, nothing big here. But the key part of this particular code is the dot frame min width 20. So I have to give it a minimum width, and the alignment center. So I'm able to give it an alignment, but it only affects this particular text view. So I have to copy the same alignment and frame in the data's part of it to make it kind of match. And you'll see what I mean in a minute. Right now, I have some more code that's not shown, just because all of this code is pretty much is very similar, so it didn't make sense to show you the entire thing. And obviously, there's more code down here as well. So if we go into the standing row view, we have an image with an image of the team, the ranking, and their name. And that the name has to have more room, which you don't really, that flexibility isn't there. So how do you make it work? So again, I had to wrap it in an H stack, and then that gave me the ability to make it work. And as I said, I'm not showing all of the code right now in here, but you can see here where I have wins, losses, and you can see, again, I'm adding the min width of 20 and the alignment of center. That's the first design. Let's look at the next one. And then this one is an appointment booking design. And what I found unique is it has like two different sections going on right here. So what's different and what's unique about this one is I have the ability that we have two different types of sections. So how would we make this work? So again, we're going to have more code to write to make this work when we shouldn't. It's really not that much, but we have to write more code, which then means we have to make more adjustments to make this work. And then finally, this gives us far less flexibility in dynamic type and all of the different things that we need. So let's again look at the way that iOS 15 allows us to implement this. And of course, I should have opened up with the fact that everybody, everyone that sees this, you could probably write it maybe slightly different or whatever. There may be other ways to write it, but you're still going to have the same problems. So here, I'm writing the date, the time, and the doctor, and I'm creating again a frame that has a min width and a max width, and setting the alignment. And obviously, I'm not showing all of the code. So right now you see date, but we're showing and displaying both time and doctor. Next, I have the data side. So we have the date, the time, and the doctor that we're displaying, and it mimics exactly what we did in the header section. After that, we have more code not shown. And then we have this H stack we just looked at. I minimized it, and right underneath it, I add a divider so that we have that line. And then we go to the next section. So here we have another V stack. We have to use, again, more code not shown, but the key here is the -18 in spacing. That is the extra stuff we have to do to make it kind of get in the padding and the frame that we need to make it work. Not a big deal, but it does need to happen. So here we have type and location that are added to the header in the second section. And then finally, we have our dentist, and then the location, and then the button. And so all of this is put into an H stack. And again, the spacing is -18. So this all works there. So that's our second design. So right now we've seen kind of two somewhat simple designs, but let's look at something a little more complicated. And we'll see that we have a movie theater seating. So now we're getting way more complicated, and there's a ton of challenges here. So I'll cover the three main ones here. We have different rows. So how do we handle that in iOS 15? We have spacing issues that we have to come up with. In particular, aisles and rows, where our aisles where people walk, we have to represent that in the layout. So how do we do that? And then finally, we have seating position. And when a user selects a seat, we know which seat they're selecting. So that's another issue that we have to deal with. And all of this has been solved, but it wasn't easy. And so let's look at each one of these. So as you can see, we have two different designs. One on the left, I'm using one different type of way of doing it. And the one on the right, I'm using a different way. Or I should say on your right and left. Either way, you get what I mean. So let's look at the first design. Here we're using lazy grids. And I had to do each row as a different section. So I can't use a lazy grid with odd number, or I should say, you can't use a lazy grid to go 4 and then 5. So the first row is one lazy grid, and that's how I did it. The second row is a lazy grid, and the third row is a different lazy grid, but it's done a little bit differently because of the accessible seats and how they work. And then the back row is another section. So in code, what you see is you'll see I have the screen, and then I have a V stack that has the front section, the accessible section, and the back section. And so that's how I did each one of these specifically. It's the code in here doesn't matter. It's way too much to try to show you. So I'm just kind of giving you an overview. So the next one, this is the one that was way more complicated, because if you use a lazy grid, it can only go a certain number. So the creative mind of my coworker decided, why don't we split it and make it do whatever we need on one side and then have it flip it and do it on the other side. So we were able to make this work, and this is dynamic. We can make it change layouts and do all of it, what we need to do. But the challenge was getting the letters and all the rows to be lined with A, getting the front row and the back row to have less seats, and then have the right side be in and inside of the aisle. Just a lot of different challenges going on here that weren't easy to do in iOS 15. And so here, again, thanks to Taylor, we have this entire thing of code that, again, I could not fit all on one screen and really doesn't matter. But you can see it can be done. It's just very complicated, and it's very, I mean, it's simple. There, it could be refactored even more, but you understand what I mean and how this works. So now we're going to do complex design simplified in iOS 16. So we remember the first design. We did our NFL app. Our NFL app, we had the standings, and we had the issues with spacing, and we also had the issues with alignment. Well, with Grid, we can create our spacing in our initializer, set to 5 and set to 10 for vertical. All right, we'll close that down. And now, let's see. The setup is the exact same as we did before, but instead of having a for each on an H stack, we do a for each on a grid row. So let's look at the header first. Inside of the header, we have a spacer, and we're saying we're setting it to 3 cells. So that gives us the space that we need at the beginning. We can then say, by adding this, we can put the grid cell unsize axis to vertical, which will also help with some of the alignment. And then we want to have all of the headers to align to the center. So we can apply .grid column alignment to center. So there we go there. So let's look at the row and see how that works. We have the rank, the image, and the name. And we have to apply a grid column alignment because we don't have a header that's actually applying these. So here you can see .leading for these alignments. And simply enough, that's where all we need. But the wins, the losses, and everything else will take whatever the parent gives us. So all of that was done in the header. So it's going to do what the header tells it to do in this particular case. Let's look at the second design. So the appointment booking, and let's see how that's different. So we added into an H stack, and we set our spacing horizontally to 50. So we can minimize that. And let's look at the first row of the grid. Here we have date, time, and doctor. So by applying .leading to each one of these, we've set the alignment for everything going forward in here. So we have our first grid row. Now, if we add our data, they will automatically take the alignment. So all we have to do is just add text. Again, one source of truth for the alignment. We don't have to worry about it. We also have the divider, which is done a little bit differently. So if we put the divider inside of the grid, it will expand the entire width of whatever our grid is going to be. So in here, I added the grid, and then I put padding on it on the vertical so that we have a little bit on the top and a little bit on the bottom for spacing. And let's look at our third grid row. We have type and location. And basically, we're doing the grid alignment to leading just like we did above. And then finally, we just add the 2 text views, and we add our button. And the key here is we give the frame max width for our button inside of the text. This will give us the ability to, when we rotate a device or go to a larger device, the button will fill the entire column rather than staying small. So this makes it really easy for us to work on any device, any rotation, and it really does make things simpler. And now let's look at our final design. So movie seating. We have a grid row. We're going to add the vertical spacing to 40. And here we just have an H stack where we have 4 items that we need, and we have it created. And this is somewhat minimized, but basically the overall idea is we have a grid row with 4 items. Then we have our second grid row with 5 items. Then we have our third grid row, which in here we do a little bit different. And I minimize this code just for simplicity's sake, but I have one section. I have actually 3 different sections of grid rows in this H stack. So we could have the left side of the accessible section, the middle section, and the right section. And all of that is wrapped in an H stack together. So that's the only real difference, but basically that's all I'm doing here. And then finally, the back row, since all of those are the same number of items, I can just loop through it 4 times and say I want 4 items each, and we're done. So what we learned here, we sat and we learned that in iOS 15, we had complex designs that we had to deal with a little bit more, and we had less flexibility. We looked at the intro into grids. And then we also looked at how complex designs can be simplified by using iOS 16. And so I am done. We are done. So now we get to ask questions Q&A with Anna and Max.
So what I can say, it was wow. Actually, I was looking mostly at your presentation, how it was designed and organized. So I was distracted mostly with the design. But really, I can see that's why I understood why you asked me some questions and how you were planning to do it. It was really done so well.